Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, and in today's short video I want to go a little bit deeper into a statement that I made in the previous video when I was explaining or trying to explain why we feel a division between ourselves and our experience, as if there was a certain experience happening and it was happening to a certain me or a certain I. And in that video, I mentioned that because of the repressive mechanisms of our mind, which are mechanisms that are there to repress or hide things that we are not ready to confront or to assimilate, truths that are too unpalatable, too difficult, makes us feel unprepared or like we're going to be overwhelmed. There's all these mechanisms in the mind that are in charge of hiding these truths from us for later revision, you could say, whenever the system feels ready to assimilate those truths. Now, because that repressive mechanism of the mind is there, we disconnect ourselves from several parts of our own psyche, and those parts of our psyche become projected to the outside. See, our psyche is trying to resolve itself and it feels incomplete, but because repression has taken place, it doesn't know where the lack of completeness comes from, so it projects it onto the world. And I mentioned in the last video that we can go, I mentioned herrings and, red herrings, and I mentioned wild goose chases, right? So all kinds of animal little phrases going on there. But so a red herring or a wild goose chase, it was my attempt to explain how, due to the hidden nature of our repressions, we never really know what we're actually chasing. The completion that we're chasing is not known. It is not clear to our conscious mind that we are only ever really looking to complete ourselves. So we project that lack of completion to the world in the form of fears and desires, and sometimes both at the same time, right? Now, why do I say all of this? Because it also, in understanding this, it can make our work in rooting out the ego and in self-cultivation much more efficient and less frustrating than it often is. There is a very pervasive thought or attitude that I come across in people that I work with, which is they'll be explaining a certain hang-up that they have, and then they'll say, oh, but that's just my ego. Or the question will come up, well, I was trying to decide whether to do A or B, but then, I was thinking, okay, maybe my ego wants to do this, and then if I don't do it, then I beat my ego in its own game, So there's all these sort of tactical ways to try to get around the ego, try to outsmart it. And what you will notice from all of these is that they are concerned with trying to think the right thoughts and trying to take the right actions. In other words, we are trying to think in ways that are not egoic. We are trying to have emotions that are not egoic, or we are trying not to have any emotions at all because they are all egoic. And we are trying to act in ways that are wholesome and therefore, quote unquote, not egoic. And what I hint at in the title of this video, which is Don't Bother with the Visible Ego, is that all of these tactical things are still egoic. It's like no matter what you do, it will be egoic so long as you feel that there is an I doing it. So long as the sense that there is a self which is thinking the thoughts, whether they're egoic or not, or feeling the emotions, so long as it feels like there is a self carrying out the actions, it is all 100% egoic in nature. That is not to say that wholesome and all unwholesome actions, thoughts, or emotions are made of the same cloth. They're not. There is the kind of thinking and action that gets you to clarify and eventually dissolve the ego, and there's the kind of action that doesn't. Okay, so I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that to clarify the ego, to process it, to digest it, and to let's say process the repressed layers of our mind, all that song and dance of how do I act, think, and emote in a way that is less egoic is a complete waste of time. Because by the time thought, emotion, or action comes to the conscious layer of the mind, by the time you can see it, you can be certain that you are looking at an effect in the mind. And the cause, due to the repressive mechanisms that I was mentioning earlier, is hidden from you. And here's the hint that then closes this entire loop is the I that you believe is looking at the thought or thinking the thought, right? First it's like, oh, I'm thinking the thought. Then I'm like, oh no, I'm the witness of the thought. But so long as there is an I in the picture, then you can be certain that there is a hidden cause or a hidden motive for the thought, emotion, or action that you are consciously experiencing. It is the I that's the hidden pole. It's the I that's the hidden part. It is the I that is the repressed, unnoticed background or the context in which the content of thought, emotion, and action is arising. So long as you believe that there is a background, a knowing witness, or an I or a self in which these things are arising or to whom these things are arising, know that they are egoic because you are, the I is a placeholder of the mind for that which I have not yet seen. Okay, that would be a good summary of how to put this. So long as there's an I, there is an unseen motive or cause for the thought. And so you can immediately notice through that if that's the case, then to try to figure out what to do with the thought, to try to suppress it, control it, improve it, or to try and only have wholesome thoughts is a losing game. Not only because by the time the thoughts arise or the emotions arise, already the cause is not seen and hidden, as I said, but because the very intent or the very willful intent to change things and manipulate them to beat the ego is coming also from an I. Whatever arises in the mind from an apparent I is already egoic in a fundamental sense. So the game cannot be played on that level. The game can be observed on that level, but it can't be defeated on that level, and anything you do on that level only gets you entangled in the game. As they said in that movie, whose name I forget, that doesn't happen very often, the only way to win is not to play, right? Now that's not the same as saying that there's nothing to do. Once again, we go back to, so then what? And the then what is, don't go after the content, go after the source of the content, the apparently hidden source of the content, which appears in the mind as the sense I am. The sense I am is the conscious mind's very best attempt at that which it can't see. And your job is to observe that and get behind that I amness and try to see what it's made of, not because you're going to find anyone there, but because through looking, you enact the clarification of the mind. You bring to the foreground that which is hidden in the background. Nisargadatta Maharaj said something very funny about that. He says, I'm all front and no back. What that meant was the apparent witness or the knowing context which is hidden disappeared. It all became content, including the sense of self, right? So the sense of self that feels like where you're coming from, it's not really there. You're not coming from anywhere because there's no you there. But so long as it feels like you're coming from somewhere, that there's a back and the front, you can be certain that the back is a placeholder for repressed material that needs to be clarified, okay? So this is taken me quite a while to figure out, and part of the reason for that also is that this is not knowledge that can be attained by consuming information. The clarification of the mind is an experiential understanding. You don't just arrive at this by listening and getting that the sense of self is a spurious placeholder for repressed material. The repressed material needs to be brought to the surface. It needs to be unrepressed, and of course that part is going to be rather uncomfortable. In the words of Morpheus, no one can be told what the matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. That means do the work of self-inquiry and do whatever practices you need in order to regulate and clarify your nervous system, right? You can think of these repressed layers as kind of layers like a Russian doll, right? Like there's several layers that feel like I, and one wants to orient our attention in what is it that feels like I in this moment. And if you dedicate your attention to this, you'll start to clarify things and notice that that which feels like I is a little mechanism of departure away from psychosomatic discomforts that are there to repress unprocessed material. Yeah, so clarify, clarify, clarify. We don't attack problems. We do not confront problems. We dedicate ourselves to clarifying to whom are they occurring? What is the supposed I that is at the receiving end of whatever experience is being had, whether it's a problem or a pleasant experience? And you keep doing that until the sense of self has unified with experience and there's no difference between those two, right? That's where non-duality begins to naturally arise. Non-duality doesn't need to be understood. It can be conceptually understood, but that doesn't do you much good, right? I don't know why I do this, by the way. I think there's got to be like some sort of level of masochism in me. But I was watching Tony Parsons' videos yesterday, and I'm thinking, there's people who come to the microphone and says like, so what do I need to get? And he's like, there's nothing to get. And then they go, oh, okay, there's nothing to get. Oh, I get it. There's nothing to get. And then they go and sit. And I think to myself, that person just tricked themselves into thinking that they get it the way Tony does. And Tony, by the way, to those who don't know who Tony Parsons is, he's one of those Neo-Advaita teachers that says there's nothing to do, there's no one to do it, kind of giving the game away, sort of dynamic there. But how is that going to actually get you the experiential non-dual understanding, which is full of wholesomeness, bliss, and in which your hang-ups dissolve? Is not, right? This needs to be properly done. So it is in a sense also an invitation to not bother with the visible part of the ego, but to relentlessly hunt after the invisible part of the ego, which hides itself behind what you call I. That's the hidden place. That's the entry point, and it's perfectly available. One just needs to tap into that sense of self and stay there for a fairly long time until things begin to clarify and arise. So it's a very dedicated endeavor. and it will most likely lead to some very painful affects coming towards the conscious level of the mind. So that also needs to be carefully navigated. It's not an easy process by any means. It's simple to understand, but it's not simple to do, and it takes a fairly long time, at least in some cases, such as mine. I'm not a I saw the light all of a sudden without no effort type. Clearly, I need to grind it out, and most of the people I know also need to grind it out in this kind of way. So the essence of today's video is to not get caught up in trying to think, emote, or act in ways that are less egoic. You can think, emote, or act in ways that are more wholesome, or that are more conducive to the clarification of the ego. Yeah, that is possible. But the ego cannot be beaten on that level, because it's like you're swinging at the illusion. And you remember once again in the Matrix, when Morpheus is talking to Neo and explaining him what these agents, he says, I've seen men empty entire clips at them, like shoot at them, and hit nothing but air. That's what happens when you try to beat the ego on the content level, on the level of thought, action, and emotion. You can't, because there's a hidden pole that is creating that content, and that's the one that you want to find. And I'll repeat it once again, just, repetition is the mother of mastery, right? The hidden pole that you want to find is hiding behind the sense of I am. That's where that's how the repressed material feels like. It feels like self, okay? And so focus there. Focus on the source from which thoughts arise. By the time they do, they are already an effect. There's no point in getting into a tug of war with them. It's like trying to beat your shadow at shadow boxing. It can't be done. You are much better off retracting your attention like a turtle retracts into a shell, and seeking for the source from which the thoughts come, or to whom the thoughts occur, the I or the self. And in doing so, what you will actually find is that the I or the self is the repression mechanism, and the repressed material right behind it, which is ready to be felt if you put in the effort. So that is the gist of today's video. Is about not going into wild goose chases after content, trying to beat the ego there, but to cut it at its root. Very common little trap in the work that we try to do of self-realization, self-cultivation. As ever, very curious to hear what you guys make of the video, and if you think that it is valuable and maybe also handy for others, then your liking, sharing, and subscribing is always welcome. Thanks for listening this far. I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Cheerio. Bye-bye.